Corruption, fraud, and all forms of financial impropriety and malfeasance are problems that are very pervasive in South Africa, the South African commercial world, so to speak. The impact that corruption and fraud have on the national economy are so devastating that literally the country is being bled to death. It's bleeding to death. You see decay in almost every sector of the economy, and in every situation where you ask questions, the answer is it is because of corruption, it is because of fraud, it is because of financial impropriety, that inclination towards lining one's pocket at the expense of the state and at the expense of integrity. That is the problem that South Africa is facing right now. And as a result, a video on forensic investigation and fraud detection techniques in quantity surveying and construction, the construction industry generally in South Africa, will shed a little bit of light. Of course, we have just selected the construction industry, but maybe that's for the purposes of today's discussion. But you understand that this problem is pervasive in almost every sector. In fact, in every sector, not almost every sector of commercial activity in this country. So my name is Philani Ndlovu. I hope that you find this presentation informative. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, to click the subscription note, click the notification bell, like the video, and share the video with your friends. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next item. So the objectives of this lecture are that by the end of the discussion, you who is attending this should be able to identify and conduct investigations on selected crimes and transgressions specific to any sector of the economy. But in this case, we are looking at the quantity surveying area, because that's one area where we have decided to pay a little bit of attention. So carry out acts to promote strategic and operational as well as tactical forensic crime investigations, crime intelligence, through the use of crime intelligence. Apply overt and covert collection techniques in the private and public investigation environment. That is collection of evidence or material that would be of evidential value. The laws that are very relevant to this discussion, this is not a complete list, but you could refer to section 14 of the Constitution, which deals with the right to privacy. Then section 35 of the Constitution on evidence obtained in violation of the law and the Constitution. Then your Criminal Procedure Act 51 of 1977 should come in handy. Your Electronic Communication and Transactions Act of 2002, that's number 25. And your Protection of Personal Information and Privacy Act, that's the POPIA, and your Prevention of Organized Crime Act of 1988, that's Act 121, as well as the Quantity Surveying Act 49 of the year 2000. If you really want to understand the issue of investigating and foreclosing any opportunities for fraud, these are some of the laws that you should have in mind. And we are saying that to be effective in the field of corporate, private, and public service law enforcement agencies who gather information during the investigation processes, one would need competences to successfully investigate these crimes, these transgressions, and these irregularities within the framework of the South African Constitution. So don't forget that part. So let's just go straight and introduce what we mean by forensic investigation and fraud detection techniques. We are saying they play a pivotal role in uncovering and preventing fraudulent activities in various domains. And the term forensic refers to the application of scientific principles and methodologies to investigate and analyze evidence, often in legal or regulatory contexts. And in the field of fraud detection, forensic investigation techniques are used to identify, collect, preserve, and analyze evidence related to these fraudulent activities. So there's a lot there in that field, in that area. Then we have what we call fraud investigation, where we are talking about a systematic and thorough process of inquiry to discover relevant evidence of fraudulent activities and to determine the extent of such activities in an organization, taking into account that each investigation may vary depending on the circumstances. There are key steps that are typically followed in any investigation. Now we will disclose them in the course of this video. Just stay with us so that you don't miss any action. So we are saying, what is fraud? And in an attempt to answer, we're saying that it is deliberate deception or misrepresentation that is carried out to obtain an unlawful gain or to cause financial or reputational harm to an individual, an organization, or an entity. So entities do suffer a lot from this fraud. And we are saying it can occur in various forms such as financial fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft, cyber fraud, and many others. Well, the issue of the cyberspace, the internet, you've got so many of those. And we are saying detecting and investigating fraud is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the financial systems, protecting individuals and businesses, and ensuring fair and ethical practices. Forensic investigation and fraud detection techniques encompass a wide range of methodological methodologies, tools, and skills. So you employ methodologies, tools, and skills to carry out the investigation. By techniques, we are talking about an identification of risk and potential harm. Those are the techniques that you need. Careful examination and analysis of financial records, electronic data, documents, interviews, and other sources of evidence. And then the ultimate goal is to construct events, identify perpetrators, determine the extent of the fraud, and provide evidence that can be used in legal proceedings if necessary. And it involves fraud detection through the identification of patterns and anomalies within data. So in an organization, you may have to monitor data, and you may identify any patterns or any trends that may begin to develop. So by doing that, you see, you are able to reconstruct events, then you are able to identify perpetrators, and you are able to determine the extent of the fraud. And so we are saying that evidence would be relevant in legal proceedings. It may be used there. And we are saying these techniques include the employment of data analysis techniques such as data mining, statistical analysis, and predictive modeling, and examining large volumes of data, which helps us to uncover some suspicious transactions, unusual behaviors, and deviations from what is deemed normal within the context of each industry. And then any deviation from established patterns, that's indicative of fraudulent activity. So we must really be alert when it comes to that. The field of operation of forensic investigators. You find that forensic investigators play various roles. In forensic accounting, using forensic accounting techniques to examine financial records and transactions, undertaking meticulous review of financial statements, bank records, invoices, your receipts, and all other important financial documents, your source documents particularly, because that's where most of the fraud and forgery takes place, where some forged invoices and forged receipts are presented, and sometimes with an alteration of banking details and particulars of the clients, the vendors that we deal with in our day-to-day business lives. So forensic investigators, look for inconsistencies. So you must have an eye for detail. You must have identify any inconsistencies in data, any irregularities, any simulated transactions, any hidden assets, or any manipulated records that may indicate fraudulent activities such as embezzlement, money laundering, or false financial reporting. These are the things that cripple businesses. When people do false financial reporting, whereby in some instances they may even inflate the value of a company, you find that the statement of the financial position of an organization is overrated and overstated, giving an impression that a company is viable and profitable when it is not. Those of you who are familiar with the Enron scandal of the United States in 2007, 2008 would readily understand how the falsification and false presentation of financial records and the position of the company actually gave a false impression that share prices for a certain company were going for 90 US dollars. And when the reporting irregularity was uncovered, in a day or even less, the share price dropped from $90 to $13. And imagine the loss to all those who had actually invested in that company under the impression that the shares were profitable and they stood at $90, when in actual fact the actual value was $13. So think about that very, very carefully. Then we are thinking also of digital forensics, what role they play. We are saying they play a crucial role in the modern forensic investigation and fraud detection. With the widespread use of technology and the internet, perpetrators often leave behind their digital footprint that can be analyzed to uncover evidence. So forensic experts would have to be involved in the collection, preservation, analysis of this electronic data, such as the computer softwares, maybe using computer softwares and monitoring the data in the mobile devices, email, social media accounts, as well as network logins. And then a forensic investigator may have to be very, very skilled in the use of data recovery techniques, that is computer skills, password cracking, kind of hacking, just to check the security of the systems, as well as to find information that may be hidden in people's personal accounts. And then network traffic analysis and many other ways of extracting and analyzing digital data for the purposes of discovering fraud, as well as being proactive, if one would say, to ensure that it does not happen in future. Having spoken about being proactive, we notice that fraud detection and prevention also rely on these proactive measures, such as internal controls, risk assessments, and fraud risk management measures. So every organization, every business organization should have these internal control measures that would help it to quickly identify any fraud, any potential for fraud, and then assess the risk and stay on top of the situation so that the departments are not caught napping. So there's need to implement policies and measures to mitigate the risk of fraud, including segregation of duties, regular audits, and whistleblower hotlines. Additionally, data analysis and artificial intelligence technologies are increasingly utilized to automate the detection of fraud patterns and suspicious activities in real time. And you find that the field of forensic investigation and fraud detection is interdisciplinary, combining principles from accounting, from law, from criminology, from computer science, as well as from psychology. And forensic investigators and fraud detectors require a diverse skill set, including analytical thinking, attention to detail, knowledge of legal and regulatory frameworks, your proficiency in data analysis and digital forensics, as well as your effective communication skills and report writing abilities. So you need to hone your skills in those areas if you are going to be a forensic investigator, so that you can discover all that hidden information and be able to gather it and package it so that it can then be used even in prosecution or any other scenarios where it may be necessary. So you find that principles of evidence apply. We go back here to our principles of the law of evidence. You may look at some of my videos that I have shared on principles of evidence and the application of these principles, identification of evidence that is what you call relevant to particular scenarios. But maybe in short, for the purposes of this discussion, we can say a forensic investigator should possess a detailed knowledge and skills and values to understand all aspects regarding the principles of evidence related to forensic investigation, including the legal elements of specific crimes, transgressions, and irregularities, rules about search and seizure, and the obtaining of search warrants. As I have said, you may check out my video on criminal procedure as well as videos on the law of evidence. They have dealt with these issues. The interception of evidence, collection, preservation, and presentation of the evidence, that's very, very important. Continuity of possession regarding evidence. Now, why is it important? If one person has gone in as an investigator, it could be a police officer or a member of a forensic investigating team, then they obtain artifacts or any items of evidence that are obtained through the search and seizure. It matters how these are kept, the custody of, the handling of these items, how they are kept in custody, who has control over them. Because you see, leaving them out there in the open and not exercising due control over them exposes these items of evidence to what we can call, it tampers with their integrity, if one could say. So you find that any interception of evidence, or rather any break in the continuity of custody and preservation, would actually have far-reaching implications. So because there's issues of pattern of proof applicable to different types of evidence, you must have that in mind, because it's going to affect the analysis of the evidence in the long run. And remember, there is some evidence where there will be need for experts to help analyze that evidence, because it does not lend itself to easy analysis by an ordinary person or somebody who is not very skilled in that area. So it is very, very important to think about that. Even disposal of some of the evidence, those are issues that must always be kept in mind when one is gathering evidence. So it's very important to understand that you must develop sound forensic methods and techniques. As an investigator, you must maintain a well-rounded systematic knowledge and investigation competencies with regard to forensic methods and techniques in the private and public investigation environment. As an investigator, you must be equipped to undertake risk analysis, investigation of vulnerable areas, systems, or even these electronic resources. You must investigate with regards to non-compliance. So you are checking for compliance and non-compliance, and be in a position to make recommendations, to apply a multidisciplinary approach, and to develop prevention strategies. Because remember, we don't want people to just go ahead and commit a fraud so that we can catch them afterwards. It's best to ensure that they do not commit it in the first place. So if we may develop ways to foreclose the conduct that may expose our assets as an organization, expose them to fraud and other risks, then we should be proactive. I think we spoke about that one earlier on. So developing those prevention strategies is very essential and integral to the development of a good forensic investigation and risk management strategy in an organization. So we are going to use the duties of a quantity. I mean, we are going to look at quantity surveying as an area of interest. Just as an example of those scenarios where fraud can be detected, and then forensic skills may then be used. Let's look at the duties of a surveyor, a quantity surveyor specifically. You know that our surveyors are regulated by the South African Council for Quality Surveying Profession and the Association of South African Quantity Surveyors. So it's the Quantity Surveying Profession and the Quantity Surveyors Association. And so what is expected of these quantity surveyors is to conduct feasibility studies, to estimate materials, time, and the labor costs, to prepare, negotiate, as well as analyze costs for tenders and contracts, and to coordinate the work effort and advise on a range of legal and contractual issues, as well as valuing completed work and then authorizing, arranging payments. That's very, very important. These are some of the main duties that these quantity surveyors do. So they evaluate what quantities are going to be required, and even in the course of the construction process, they are the ones who will determine how much work has been done, and then whether the client must then pay the contractor for the work completed so far at each phase of the project. So that's very important. Those are some of the very critical roles of a quantity surveyor. So you find that the quantity surveyor sometimes faces quite a number of ethical dilemmas. Well, some people would argue that these are not dilemmas per se, but you find that they have to deal with some of these issues on their day-to-day work and conduct. For instance, market pricing with large and established firms may actually be a barrier to entry for young and startups. For startups, these newly established quantity surveying firms. So some of them may be tempted to manipulate pricing, this race to the bottom, and so on and so forth. But because the tariffs or the costs are already, pegged and set by the regulators, the regulatory authority, this race to the bottom may sometimes not be easy. But it does happen that some people tend to stoop down that law. And then you have unethical contractors who would want approval for work not yet completed. For instance, you may find that a contractor is working on a project and wants to be paid for work which has not yet been completed. Then that contractor approaches the quantity surveyor and asks the surveyor to make a report that the work has been completed, so as a way of facilitating payment from the client. You can imagine the risk there when these unethical contractors entice the surveyor to approve bills of quantities contrary to the actual work that has been done on the ground. What happens if the quantity surveyor makes a report that the work has been completed, thereby inducing inducing the client to pay for the work that has not yet been completed, and then it later turns out that the work was not completed in the first place, and then maybe you find that that contractor has become insolvent. What will happen to that work? So it can be quite problematic. And so sometimes these quantity surveyors face the temptation to manipulate tender processes, that temptation to accept late submission of tenders in return for kickbacks. So in other words, you find that when the quantity surveyor has become aware of the bids by different prospective contractors, then he or she tips a friend to say, okay, the lowest bid is at a certain figure. Let's say the bid is at 20, that's the lowest is at 20 million. So you can peg yours at 19 million, where then we will award you the tender. So that, and under such circumstances, he is then aiding one prospective constructor to make a presentation, so that when the tender is eventually awarded, this surveyor gets a quick what you call a kickback as a kind of a thank you incentive for delivering the tender to that contractor. So this is the issue of collusive dealing, whereby you find the consultant, quantity surveyor, and the project manager may even team up for some dubious means. We have spoken about the issue of approving payment when the work has not yet been done. Those are some of the things. And then there's the issue of dealing with the political influence and the influence of politicians who are always meddling. I think this one is a thorn in the flesh in the construction industry in South Africa, where you find that maybe linked to the issue of construction mafias, there is a lot of irregularity. The lives of these professionals are at risk, because you find that the politician wants to push for fraud, and the politician is involved in procurement manipulation and tampering with the negotiation process, so as to facilitate the acquisition of those job opportunities by friends and associates and all those who are politically connected. It then creates a lot of problems, especially for these quantity surveyors and these different construction engineers and whoever is involved there, because then they end up having to either endorse those fraudulent claims or move away from the industry altogether, or just keep quiet at their own risk, of course, because you can't really professionally be expected to keep quiet when some fraud is taking place, because otherwise you're also being complicit in that. So you find that this corruption in the awarding of tenders is quite problematic. Sometimes these quantity surveyors may even push for excessive discounting of professional fees, just maybe to keep afloat if they cannot sustain the competition. So all those are issues that become problematic for the forensic rather for the quantity surveyor. So they are potential areas of fraud, very tempting and enticing the surveyor to stoop down low and end up doing what he professionally or she professionally should not be doing. So take note of that. The potential areas for fraud are collusion, bribery, collusive tendering. We spoke about how, the quantity surveyor may end up making friends among contractors and then, enabling them to secure the job opportunities through processes that are not exactly ethical. We call it collusive because they are talking behind the scenes and they are finding ways of giving the job to each other. So during the adjudication process, you find that the quantity surveyor is already speaking favorably of a certain bid because he or she wants that bid to win, because there's already going to be there's been a promise rather of a kickback in the event that that bid wins. So that is called collusive tendering, which could also result in removal of certain contract bids, especially for those clients or those potential contractors whom the quantity surveyor may not, for certain reason, like to work with. So that becomes an issue, as does the problem of bid hunting, where you find that through bid hunting and payment games such as halting due payments, there is prejudice against what's called the client. So maybe coming back to bid hunting, it's a scenario whereby the quantity surveyor goes around looking for potential contractors and telling them exactly how they must structure their bid applications, and then assuring them that if they do make those applications and submissions as the quantity surveyor, he or she is going to, during the adjudication process, speak favorably and recommend that bid so that it eventually wins. So they also take part in claim games where they exaggerate the charges, or they allow for fraudulent claims by contractors who have not yet completed work, but then they portray it as if that work has been completed, so that the contractor may be paid in advance, much to the disadvantage and sometimes to the prejudice of the client. That's very, very important to take note of. And sometimes they use coercive means and intimidation, actuated by a conflict of interest, where you find that this surveyor is no longer acting in the interests of the profession, but he is driven by personal desire for wealth, such that he or she now falsifies documents, is now manipulating the system for personal great gain, so to speak. And sometimes you've got some of these surveyors who no longer have technical competence, because maybe they are not keeping abreast with the developments in their industry, to the point that technical incompetence now becomes an area which then jeopardizes their capacity to do the work. As a result, maybe leading them to fraudulent conduct, if one were to say. The key steps in conducting a fraud investigation, there are quite a number of them, but we have these 10 here. Identifying an allegation, that is, following a report, maybe established through maybe a finding that some receipts or some invoices or whatever source document may have been tampered with or forged or fraudulently produced. There may then be a reason to carry out an investigation based on that report, that maybe that suspicion. So then what is important is to establish an investigation team. When that investigation team has been established, then one has to plan the investigation. Having done so, what do we mean? The investigation team must consist of, it must be, composed of a multidisciplinary, number of people who could be from accounting, who could be from law, who could be from, depending on the nature of the problem, who could be from the construction industry. It could be people from the law enforcement service, the police, or even the medical profession, depending on what forensic work is being undertaken. And then, so when a team has been put together, the next thing is to plan the investigation step by step. What information are you looking for? Where do you expect to find it? How do you expect to find it? Who are you going to talk to? And so on and so forth. That's planning the investigation. If interviews are going to be carried out, where are you going to meet the interviewees? And what questions are you going to ask them? And so on and so forth. That's very important. So you collect and preserve the evidence, taking account of your evidence plan, which you have already set, to say this is how I'm going to gather my evidence. And then, having gathered that evidence, you are going to also plan how you're going to package it, so that if it has to be used in a court of law, you already have a sequence of how it's going to be presented. You've got a tentative questions that it must answer, and so you are planning how it's going to be presented, so that it can have that persuasive effect on the court or the tribunal where it's going to be used. So you also consider the point of preserving the chain of custody from the first person who receives the item of evidence, which could be a receipt, which could be an invoice or a book or a computer file. You must make that assurance, give that assurance that it doesn't get tampered with, so that at the end of the day, there's no dispute. You don't have the other parties to the dispute impugning the evidence and arguing that it was tampered with, because maybe there are questions about its integrity emanating from how it was collected, how it was stored and preserved, who had custody of it, who had access to it, and all those important questions to consider. Then, once you have done that, having planned your evidence collection and preservation, you go on to conduct interviews with relevant people who could be potential witnesses, who could be the suspect, the person suspected of involvement in the fraud. So you plan the interviews as well. You invite the person, you meet them at a friendly environment, you make them comfortable. Even the suspect must be treated with dignity. Remember, we spoke about section 14 of the Constitution, as well as section 35. So all those Miranda warnings must be made or given to the suspect, so that the suspected person does not unduly incriminate himself or herself. The reason being that if that is not done, such evidence may not be admissible in court. If confessions and admissions are made, they may be affected by rules regarding the admission of confessions and admissions. You may check your section 217 and your section 219 of your Criminal Procedure Act to find out how they affect the presentation of particularly the admissions and the confessions. For instance, what we mean by admissions and confessions, we are saying there are some kind of an unequivocal admission of the elements of the offense charged. So you may have to I have a video on those issues. Just familiarize yourself with it, go check for it, and I'm sure you'll find it informative. And then, so in conducting the interviews, you take note of all that. And then, as you analyze your financial data, you use all the specific data analysis tools that are available. You identify patterns, you identify trends, you identify maybe any inconsistencies that may have that may emanate from, you know, the data that is given to you. So you use those statistical methods, you use those software that are available to analyze the data. You use your, you know, statistical presentations, your graphs, your talk about your pie charts, talk about your correlation coefficients, and all those different um, tests, statistical tests that you may be willing to apply, so that you are able to pick up any trends, whether regular or irregular. And then you review the documentation and the records that have been presented to you to establish whether they tell the correct story or a consistent story about the record or about the establishment. Then you make use of those forensic techniques of investigation, your scientific methods. You use your, you know, softwares, any of those important techniques that must be applied, asking the right questions, preserving the information properly, you know. Those are some of the things that you need to take note of. And then, having done so, you document. In other words, you create a document where you state everything that you have done, what you have found, in what state you found it, how you have preserved it, how you intend to present it, and who must have access to it, under what circumstances. So you answer those questions, you write them down in a document, so that in future you can refer to it, and if anyone else needs to see that document, it is available for them to check. And then, last but not least, you report your findings to the relevant authority, who could be the management of your organization, or it could be the police service, that's the South African Police Service, or the Directorate of, you know, investigation of these sensitive crimes, commercial crimes, and so on. And maybe, because you're going to eventually use that evidence, if it's available, in the commercial crimes courts, where there is need to prosecute and convict those that are implicated in criminal conduct of whatever kind. So all that should always be at the top of your mind as you carry out these investigations and as you present your evidence. Take note, don't lose sight of that. Now, this video has looked at quite a number of issues, but specifically it's been concerned with the principles that are pivotal and critical to the conduct of forensic investigations in the area of fraud, as well as how to detect fraud. Well, it did outline some of the main issues to do with the fact that you know, the investigation must be carried out within the confines and respect of the laws of the Republic of South Africa. Specifically, mention was made of the Constitution, the Criminal Procedure Act, the Protection of Personal Information and Privacy Act, as well as the what you call the Electronic Communications Act, and so on. So we looked at what needs to be considered as the starting point. The importance, first of all, defining what we mean by forensic investigation, what we mean by fraud, and then we looked at the example of a quantity surveying as an area or a field where there is potential for what you call this, for fraud and all fraudulent economic activity and behavior. And when we applied those principles there, we do have other videos on, you know, cyber security, all those issues, problems to do with hacking of, you know, the accounts and so on, how we can protect ourselves, particularly from being hacked into. So if you really want to understand how to protect yourself in the cyberspace, please look for that video. I hope it enriches you. Thank you very much once more. Remember to subscribe unto the channel, to share the videos with your friends, as well as to like the videos, and to make comments and give feedback on how you are impacted by these videos. Thank you very much. Bye.